Hey Blake, so I have your first assignment here. I noticed the score was a 57.1. In order to move on through this program, please make sure you have a 70% or higher. So those are the places where you'll want to reach out and say, hey, I got stuck. Sometimes students want explanation videos. Other times they just say, I want to give it another try on my own before they reach out about a video. So if you just need something reset, or you want a video, let me know. Also, I apologize that your email did go right into my junk, and after Mrs. DeWitt and I were talking today, and I kind of said, man, if they reached out, I wonder what, and then it just kind of dawned on me to check my junk email. So again, I apologize for that. All of your emails now should go to my inbox. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this attempt, and I'm going to kind of go through some of the pieces of information on here. Sometimes you'll see me right on the screen, and other times I'll just kind of talk through it, and I'll click through the different frames. And so I noticed in your email, one of the things you were hung up on is how to distinguish between dependent and independent variables. And so it can be tricky. And sometimes when I talk to students, I'll say things like, well, the dependent variable depends upon the independent. And so which way does that make sense? So in this first example, we had a runner, and we were trying to decide if time or distance was dependent or independent. So if you think about this case, when you're running, does the amount of time you run depend upon how far you go? Or does how far you go depend upon how long you're running? And so students think, well, I don't know, that's kind of confusing, maybe both ways. So when we look at the equation, that can help us also. So I'm going to pull up my ink tools here. Give me just a second for this to load. There we go. Okay, so I'm focusing on this equation here. And I'm going to replace d and t with y and x, because a lot of times that's helpful for students as well. So x is always our independent variable, and y is always our dependent variable. So you can see that x is where t is, and that's always where it's going to be. It's always going to be y equals, and the x variable is going to be independent. So y is dependent, and x is independent. So in this case, y was the distance, and x was the time. So how far you run depends upon how long you run, right? If I run for just a little bit of time, I don't go very far. If I run for a lot of time, I go very far. So that's this option in here. Time is independent and distance is dependent. And I use a lot of y and x talk throughout this video as I looked through some of the ones that you had missed. And I'm just kind of clicking through to where we missed. So this says, this one was range. And so I'm going to relate to y and x. So x is the dependent variable, again, from the last example, or sorry, the independent variable. Undo. Independent. X is independent, and it's also the domain. And then y is your dependent variable, and it's also the range. So in this video, it's asking you for the range of the function. So when I look at this function, I'm focusing on the y values only. Those are the range of the function. And so that's this option here, where it only lists the y's. You'll notice they're also listed in numerical order, -7, -2, 3, and 8. So the range are the y portions of the ordered pairs. Okay, how do we know if something's a function? I tell my students we only care about the x's. We only care about our x's. The x's are what's going to tell you if it's a function or not. And the trick here is that they cannot repeat. So this first table, we're looking here, we have repeats. We have two x, we have the same x value repeated twice. This is not a function. In this table here, we're focused on the x's. I've got 0 listed twice. This is not a function. I'm not even looking at y's. In the second and fourth options, these are ordered pairs, so I'm just going to circle the x's, and you notice that none of them repeat. -8, -4, 0, 2, and 4, those are all unique, so that is a function. This one works. And then in the last one, we have -12, -6, -4, -8, and -12 again. There's your repeated value, so this one is not a function. Again, remember, ordered pairs are always x, comma, y. Yeah, hang on just a second. I'm going to pause the video. Okay, sorry, a student hopped in. All right, so let's see, where are we? 7, okay, we're on 8. Consider a function that describes how a particular car's gas mileage depends on its speed. What would be an appropriate domain? So if mileage, whoops, let me switch back to my pen. Mileage depends on speed. That means this is the dependent, or the y, and this is the independent, or the x. The mileage depends on the speed. So it just in cars in general, how that works, the faster your car goes, typically the better gas mileage you get. If you're going 60 miles an hour, you're getting pretty good gas mileage. If you're going like 30 miles an hour through town, you don't get as good a gas mileage. So it wants to know an appropriate domain. Okay, there's domain. Remember, the y is the range and the x is the domain. That's always true. So now we're looking for speed, right? We're trying to find appropriate domain. That's going to be anything about speed, miles per hour. So not going to be gallons. If it had asked for range, that one would have been good. Miles per gallon. We don't want that. We want miles per hour. We want speed. So it looks like kind of as I go through this, you're just not clear on which one's domain, which one's range, which one's dependent, which one's independent. And if you can relate it back to x and y, that's really helpful. Okay, and maybe to refresh my memory, I think that if it's listed in red, I think you have to get these right before you can go on, but eventually, I will talk about this red one just to make sure. So it asks possible x and y for 2 distinct points. What are possible values of x and y? So here's the thing we have to remember. If it's going to be a function, the x's cannot repeat. So this x can be anything except 5, because if it were a 5, then it would repeat. And the y's, we don't care if the y's repeat. So y can be anything. X, when you're talking about if it's a function or not, x is where your focus should be. Good there. And these are just kind of like little checklists. So they do ask a question, talk about how it's used, and then you kind of do this part on your own. You're kind of seeing, okay, what did I include in my response? They'll give you a sample response, and if you think, yeah, I included that, then you check it off. This part is graded, so the more check marks you give yourself, the better score you're going to get. And so I just tell students to just really make sure you read through what you wrote and what the sample response is and see if you can make some connections. Yes, I included that. Oh, I didn't include that. See if you can understand why. So I do need to reset this assignment for you, so the next time that you go in, it's going to pop up that you're back here. Mrs. DeWitt shared that you did go ahead and do the quiz already and did well on that, so you don't need to redo the quiz. So this is going to back you up to this assignment here. I know my teacher's side of this looks a little bit different than yours, and it looks like you've already started here. You've done the warm-up for the next lesson, and you're working in the instruction or you're getting ready to. So we just redo that assignment, and then you should be able to get through and back down to the instructions. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. Oh, and by the way, I'm Mrs. Herbst.